time for Atomic Julie's Galactic Bedtime Stories. Classic-era public domain sci-fi stories from Project Gutenberg. Enjoy! The Ego Machine by Henry Kuttner. From Space Science Fiction, May 1952. As found on Project Gutenberg. Narrated by Julie Hoverson. 1. Nicholas Martin looked up at the robot across the desk. "I'm not going to ask what you want," he said in a low, restrained voice. "I already know. Just go away and tell St. Cyr I approve. Tell him I think it's wonderful putting a robot in the picture. We've had everything else by now except the Rockettes, but clearly a quiet little play about Christmas among the Portuguese fishermen on the Florida coast must have a robot. Only, why not 6 robots? Tell him I suggest a baker's dozen. Go away." "Was your mother's name Helena Glinska?" the robot asked. "It was not," Martin said. "Ah, then she must have been the great hairy one," the robot murmured. Martin took his feet off the desk and sat up slowly. "It's quite all right," the robot said hastily. "You've been chosen for an ecological experiment, that's all, but it won't hurt. Robots are perfectly normal life forms where I come from, so you needn't—" "Shut up," Martin said. "Robot indeed, you bit player! This time St. Cyr has gone too far." He began to shake slightly all over with some repressed but strong emotion. The intercom box on the desk caught his eye, and he stabbed a finger at one of the switches. "Get me Miss Ashby, right away!" "I'm so sorry," the robot said apologetically. "Have I made a mistake? The threshold fluctuations in the neurons always upset my mnemonic norm when I temporalize. Isn't this a crisis point in your life?" Martin breathed hard, which seemed to confirm the robot's assumption. "Exactly," it said. "The ecological imbalance approaches a peak that may destroy the life form unless, now, either you're about to be stepped on by a mammoth, locked in an iron mask, assassinated by helots, or is this Sanskrit I am speaking?" He shook his gleaming head. "Perhaps I should have got off 50 years ago, but I thought, sorry, goodbye," he added hastily as Martin raised an angry glare. Then the robot lifted a finger to each corner of his naturally rigid mouth, and moved his fingers horizontally in opposite directions as though sketching an apologetic smile. "No, don't go away," Martin said. "I want you right here, where the sight of you can refuel my rage in case it's needed. I wish to God I could get mad and stay mad," he added plaintively, gazing at the telephone. "Are you sure your mother's name wasn't Helena Glinska?" the robot asked. It pinched thumb and forefinger together between its nominal brows, somehow giving the impression of a worried frown. "Naturally I'm sure," Martin snapped. "You aren't married yet, then, to Anastasia Zakharina Kushkina?" "Not yet or ever," Martin replied succinctly. The telephone rang. He snatched it up. "Hello, Nick," said Erica Ashby's calm voice. "Something wrong?" Instantly the fires of rage went out of Martin's eyes, to be replaced by a tender rose-pink glow. For some years now he had given Erica, his very competent agent, 10% of his take. He had also longed hopelessly to give her approximately a pound of flesh, the cardiac muscle, to put it in cold, unromantic terms. Martin did not. He put it in no terms at all, since whenever he tried to propose marriage to Erica, he was taken with such fits of modesty that he could only babble of green fields. "Well?" Erica repeated. "Something wrong?" "Yes," Martin said, drawing a long breath. "Can St. Cyr make me marry somebody named Anastasia Zakharina Kushkina?" "What a wonderful memory you have," the robot put in mournfully. "Mine used to be, before I started temporalizing, but even radioactive neurons won't stand—" "Nominally, you're still entitled to life, liberty, etc., Erica said. "But I'm busy right now, Nick. Can't it wait till I see you?" "When?" "Didn't you get my message?" Erica demanded. "Of course not," Martin said angrily. "I've suspected for some time that all my incoming calls have to be cleared by St. Cyr. Somebody might try to smuggle in a word of hope or possibly a file." His voice brightened. "Planning a jailbreak?" "Oh, this is outrageous," Erica said. "Someday St. Cyr's going to go too far." Not while he's got Dee Dee behind him, Martin said gloomily. Summit Studios would sooner have made a film promoting atheism than offend their top box office star Dee Dee Fleming. Even Tolliver Watt, who owned Summit lock, stock, and barrel, spent wakeful nights because St. Cyr refused to let the lovely Dee Dee sign a long-term contract. Nevertheless, Watt's no fool, Erica said. I still think we could get him to give you a contract release if we could make him realize what a rotten investment you are. There isn't much time, though. Why not? I told you. Oh, of course you don't know. He's leaving for Paris tomorrow morning. Martin moaned. Then I'm doomed, he said. They'll pick up my option automatically next week and I'll never draw a free breath again. Erica, do something! I'm going to, Erica said. That's exactly what I want to see you about. Ah, she said suddenly. Now I understand why St. Cyr stopped my message. He was afraid. Nick, do you know what we've got to do? See what? Nick hazarded unhappily. But Erica! See what? Alone, Erica amplified. Not if St. Cyr can help it, Nick reminded her. Exactly. Naturally, St. Cyr doesn't want us to talk to Watt privately. We might make him see reason. But this time, Nick, we've simply got to manage it somehow. One of us is going to talk to Watt, while the other keeps St. Cyr at bay. Which do you choose? Neither, Martin said promptly. Oh, Nick, I can't do the whole thing alone. Anybody'd think you were afraid of St. Cyr. I am afraid of St. Cyr, Martin said. Nonsense. What could he actually do to you? He could terrorize me. He does it all the time. Erica, he says I'm indoctrinating beautifully. Doesn't it make your blood run cold? Look at all the other writers he's indoctrinated. I know. I saw one of them on Main Street last week delving into garbage cans. Do you want to end up that way? Then stand up for your rights. Ah, said the robot wisely, nodding. Just as I thought, a crisis point. Shut up, Martin said. No, not you, Erica. I'm sorry. So am I, Erica said tartly. For a moment, I thought you'd acquired a backbone. If I were somebody like Hemingway, Martin began in a miserable voice. Did you say Hemingway? The robot inquired. Is this the Kinsey-Hemingway era? Then I must be right. You're Nicholas Martin, the next subject. Martin, let me see. Oh yes, the Disraeli type, that's it. He rubbed his forehead with a grating sound. Oh, my poor neuron thresholds. Now I remember. Nick, can you hear me? Erica's voice inquired. I'm coming over there right away. Brace yourself. We're going to beard St. Cyr in his den and convince Watt you'll never make a good screenwriter. Now... But St. Cyr won't ever admit that, Martin cried. He doesn't know the meaning of the word failure. He says so. He's going to make me into a screenwriter or kill me. Remember what happened to Ed Cassidy? Erica reminded him grimly. St. Cyr didn't make him into a screenwriter. True. Poor old Ed, Martin said with a shiver. All right then, I'm on my way. Anything else? Yes, Martin cried, drawing a deep breath. Yes, there is. I love you madly. But the words never got past his glottis. Opening and closing his mouth noiselessly, the cowardly playwright finally clenched his teeth and tried again. A faint, hopeless squeak vibrated the telephone's disc. Martin let his shoulders slump hopelessly. It was clear he could never propose to anybody, not even a harmless telephone. Did you say something? Erica asked. Well, goodbye then. Wait a minute, Martin said, his eyes suddenly falling once more upon the robot. Speechless on one subject only, he went on rapidly. I forgot to tell you, Watt and the nest-fouling St. Cyr have just hired a mock-up phony robot to play in Angelina Noel. But the line was dead. I'm not a phony, the robot said, hurt. Martin fell back in his chair and stared at his guest with dull, hopeless eyes. Neither was King Kong, he remarked. Don't start feeding me some line St. Cyr's told you to pull. I know he's trying to break my nerve. He'll probably do it, too. Look what he's done to my play already. Why, Fred Waring? I don't mind Fred Waring in his proper place. There he's fine, but not in Angelina Noel. Not as the Portuguese captain of a fishing boat manned by his entire band, accompanied by Dan Daly singing Napoli to D.D. Fleming in A Mermaid's Tale? Self-stunned by this recapitulation, Martin put his arms on the desk, his head in his hands, and to his horror, found himself giggling. The telephone rang. Martin groped for the instrument without rising from his semi-recumbent position. Who? He asked shakily. Who? St. Cyr? A hoarse bellow came over the wire. Martin sat bolt upright, seizing the phone desperately with both hands. Listen, he cried. Will you let me finish what I'm going to say just for once? Putting a robot in Angelina Noel is simply... I do not hear what you say, roared a heavy voice. Your idea stinks, whatever it is. Be at Theater 1 for yesterday's rushes, at once. But wait! St. Cyr belched and hung up. Martin's strangling hands tightened briefly on the telephone, but it was no use. The real stranglehold was the one St. Cyr had around Martin's throat, and it had been tightening now for nearly 13 weeks. Or had it been 13 years? Looking backward, Martin could scarcely believe that only a short time ago he had been a free man, a successful Broadway playwright, the author of a hit play, Angelina Noel. Then had come St. Cyr. A snob at heart, the director loved getting his clutches on hit plays and name writers. Summit Studios, he had roared at Martin, would follow the original play exactly and would give Martin the final okay on the script, provided he signed a 13-week contract to help write the screen treatment. This had seemed too good to be true. And was. Martin's downfall lay partly in the fine print and partly in the fact that Erica Ashby had been in the hospital with a bad attack of influenza at the time. Buried in legal verbiage was a clause that bound Martin to 5 years of servitude with Summit, should they pick up his option. Next week, they would certainly do just that, unless justice prevailed. I think I need a drink, Martin said unsteadily. Or several. He glanced toward the robot. I wonder if you'd mind getting me that bottle of scotch from the bar over there. But I am here to conduct an experiment in optimum ecology, said the robot. Martin closed his eyes. Pour me a drink, he pleaded. Please, then put the glass in my hand, will you? It's not much to ask. After all, we're both human beings, aren't we? Well, no, the robot said, placing a brimming glass in Martin's groping fingers. Martin drank, then he opened his eyes and blinked at the tall highball glass in his hand. The robot had filled it to the brim with scotch. Martin turned a wondering gaze on his metallic companion. You must do a lot of drinking yourself, he said thoughtfully. I suppose tolerance can be built up. Go ahead, help yourself. Take the rest of the bottle. The robot placed the tip of a finger above each eye and slid the fingers upward, as though raising his eyebrows inquiringly. Go on, have a jolt, Martin urged. Or don't you want to break bread with me under the circumstances? How can I? The robot asked. I'm a robot. His voice sounded somewhat wistful. What happens? He inquired. Is it a lubricatory or a fueling mechanism? Martin glanced at his brimming glass. Fueling, he said tersely. High octane. You really believe in staying in character, don't you? Why not... Oh, the principle of irritation, the robot interrupted. I see, just like fermented mammoth's milk. Martin choked. Have you ever drunk fermented mammoth's milk? He inquired. How could I? The robot asked. But I've seen it done. He drew a straight line vertically upward between his invisible eyebrows, managing to look wistful. Of course, my world is perfectly functional and functionally perfect, but I can't help finding temporalizing a fascinating... He broke off. I'm wasting space-time. Now, Mr. Martin, would you be willing to... Oh, have a drink, Martin said. I feel hospitable. Go ahead, indulge me, will ya? My pleasures are few, and I've got to go and be terrorized in a minute anyhow. If you can't get that mask off, I'll send for a straw. You can step out of character long enough for one jolt, can't you? I'd like to try it, the robot said pensively. Ever since I noticed the effect fermented mammoth's milk had on the boys, it's been on my mind, rather. Quite easy for a human, of course. Technically, it's simple enough, I see now. The irritation just increases the frequency of the brain's kappa waves, as with boosted voltage, but since electrical voltage never existed in pre-robot times... It did, Martin said, taking another drink. I mean, it does. What do you call that, a mammoth? He indicated the desk lamp. The robot's jaw dropped. That? He asked in blank amazement. Why then all those telephone poles and dynamos and lighting equipment I noticed in this era are powered by electricity? What did you think they were powered by? Martin asked coldly. Slaves, the robot said, examining the lamp. He switched it on, blinked, and then unscrewed the bulb. Voltage, you say? Don't be a fool, Martin said. You're overplaying your part. I've got to get going in a minute. Do you want a jolt or don't you? Well, the robot said, I don't want to seem unsociable. This ought to work. So saying, he stuck his finger in the lamp socket. There was a brief, crackling flash. The robot withdrew his finger. He said, and swayed slightly. Then his fingers came up and sketched a smile that seemed, somehow, to express delighted surprise. He said, and went on rather thickly. Integral between plus and minus infinity. I sub n to e. Martin's eyes opened wide with shocked horror. Whether a doctor or a psychiatrist should be called in was debatable, but it was perfectly evident that this was a case for the medical profession, and the sooner the better. Perhaps the police, too. The bit player in the robot suit was clearly as mad as a hatter. Martin poised indecisively, waiting for his lunatic guest either to drop dead or spring at his throat. The robot appeared to be smacking his lips with faint clicking sounds. Why, that's wonderful, he said. AC, too. You're not dead? Martin inquired shakily. I'm not even alive, the robot murmured. The way you'd understand it, that is. Ah, thanks for the jolt. Martin stared at the robot with the wildest dawning of surmise. Why, he gasped. Why, you're a robot! Certainly I'm a robot, his guest said. What slow minds you pre-robots had. Mine's working like lightning now. He stole a drunkard's glance at the desk lamp. FT. I mean, if you'd counted the kappa waves of my radioatomic brain now, you'd be amazed how the frequencies increased. He paused thoughtfully. FT, he added. Moving quite slowly, like a man underwater, Martin lifted his glass and drank whiskey. Then, cautiously, he looked up at the robot again. FT, he said, paused, shuddered, and drank again. That did it. I'm drunk, he said with an air of shaken relief. That must be it. I was almost beginning to believe. Oh, nobody believes I am a robot at first, the robot said. You'll notice I showed up in a movie lot where I wouldn't arouse suspicion. I'll appear to Ivan Vasilovich in an alchemist lab, and he'll jump to the conclusive I am an automaton, which of course I am. Then there's an Uyghur on my list. I'll appear to him in a shaman's hut, and he'll assume I'm a devil. A matter of ecological logic. Then you're a devil? Martin inquired, seizing on the only plausible solution. No, I am a robot. Don't you understand anything? I don't even know who I am now, Martin said. For all I know, I'm a fawn and you're a human child. I don't think the scotch is doing me as much good as I'd... Your name is Nicholas Martin, the robot said patiently, and mine is ENIAC. ENIAC, the robot corrected, capitalizing ENIAC, Gamma 93rd. So saying, he unslung a sack from his metallic shoulder and began to rummage out length upon length of what looked like red silk ribbon with a curious metallic luster. After approximately a quarter-mile of it had appeared, a crystal football helmet emerged attached to its end. A gleaming red-green stone was set on each side of the helmet. Just over the temporal lobes, you see, the robot explained, indicating the jewels. Now you just set it on your head like this. Oh, no, I don't, Martin said, withdrawing his head with the utmost rapidity. Neither do you, my friend. What's the idea? I don't like the looks of that gimmick. I particularly don't like those two red garnets on the sides. They look like eyes. Those are artificial ecology, the robot assured him. They simply have a high dielectric constant. It's merely a matter of altering the normal thresholds of the neuron memory circuits. All thinking is based on memory, you know. The strength of your associations, the emotional indices of your memories, channel your actions and decisions, and the ecologizer simply changes the voltage of your brain, so the thresholds are altered. Is that all it does? Martin asked suspiciously. Well, now, the robot said with a slight air of evasion. I didn't intend to mention it, but since you ask, it also imposes the master matrix of your character type. But since that's the prototype of your character in the first place, it will simply enable you to make the most of your potential ability, hereditary and acquired. It will make you react to your environment in the way that best assures your survival. Not me, it won't, Martin said firmly. Because you aren't going to put that thing on my head. The robot sketched a puzzled frown. "Oh," he said after a pause. "I haven't explained yet, have I? It's very simple. Would you be willing to take part in a valuable socio-cultural experiment for the benefit of all mankind?" "No," Martin said. "But you don't know what it is yet," the robot said plaintively. "You'll be the only one to refuse after I've explained everything thoroughly. By the way, can you understand me all right?" Martin laughed hollowly. "Natch," he said. "Good," the robot said, relieved. "That may be one trouble with my memory. I had to record so many languages before I could temporalize. Sanskrit's very simple, but medieval Russian's confusing. And as for Uyghur, however, the purpose of this experiment is to promote the most successful pro-survival relationship between man and his environment. Instant adaptation is what we're aiming at, and we hope to get it by minimizing the differential between individual and environment. In other words, the right reaction at the right time. Understand?" "Of course not," Martin said. "What nonsense you talk." "There are," the robot said rather wearily, "only a limited number of character matrices possible, depending first on the arrangement of the genes within the chromosomes and later upon environmental additions. Since environments tend to repeat, like societies, you know, and organizational pattern isn't hard to lay out along the Caldecou's timescale. You follow me so far?" "By the Caldecou's timescale, yeah," Martin said. "I was always lucid," the robot remarked a little vainly, nourishing a swirl of red ribbon. "Keep that thing away from me," Martin complained. "Drunk I may be, but I have no intention of sticking my neck out that far." "Of course you'll do it," the robot said firmly. "Nobody's ever refused yet, and don't bicker with me or you'll get me confused and I'll have to take another jolt of voltage. Then there's no telling how confused I'll be. My memory gives me enough trouble when I temporalize. Time travel always raises the synaptic delay threshold, but the trouble is it's so variable. That's why I got you mixed up with Ivan at first, but I don't visit him till after I've seen you. I'm running the test chronologically, and 1952 comes before 1570, of course." "It doesn't," Martin said, tilting the glass to his lips. "Not even in Hollywood does 1952 come before 1570. "I'm using the Caldecou's timescale," the robot explained, "but really only for convenience. Now, do you want the ideal ecological differential, or don't you? Because—" Here, he flourished the red ribbon again, peered into the helmet, looked narrowly at Martin, and shook his head. "I'm sorry," the robot said. "I'm afraid this won't work. Your head's too small. Not enough brain room, I suppose. This helmet's for an 8.5 head, and yours is much too—" "My head is 8.5," Martin protested with dignity. "Can't be," the robot said cunningly. "If it were, the helmet would fit, and it doesn't. Too big." "It does fit," Martin said. "That's the trouble with arguing with pre-robot species," ENIAC said, as to himself. "Low, brutish, unreasoning. No wonder when their heads are so small. Now, Mr. Martin," he spoke as though to a small, stupid, stubborn child, "try to understand. The helmet's size 8.5. Your head is unfortunately so small that the helmet wouldn't fit." "Blast it!" cried the infuriated Martin, caution quite lost between scotch and annoyance. "It does fit! Look here!" Recklessly, he snatched the helmet and clapped it firmly on his head. "It fits perfectly!" "I erred," the robot acknowledged with such a gleam in his eye that Martin, suddenly conscious of his rashness, jerked the helmet from his head and dropped it on the desk. ENIAC quietly picked it up and put it back into his sack, stuffing the red ribbon in after it with rapid motions. Martin watched, baffled, until ENIAC had finished, gathered together the mouth of the sack, swung it on his shoulder again, and turned toward the door. "Goodbye," the robot said, "and thank you." "For what?" Martin demanded. "For your cooperation," the robot said. "I won't cooperate," Martin told him flatly. "It's no use. Whatever full treatment it is you're selling, I'm not going to—" "Oh, you've already had the ecology treatment," ENIAC replied blandly. "I'll be back tonight to renew the charge. It lasts only 12 hours. "What?" ENIAC moved his forefingers outward from the corners of his mouth, sketching a polite smile. Then he stepped through the door and closed it behind him. Martin made a faint squealing sound like a stuck but gagged pig. Something was happening inside his head. End of part 1. More next week. Music by Alexander Stamenkovic, as found on Jamendo. The opening and closing music is by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. No claim is made to the underlying story. Copyright of this reading is to Julie Hoverson and Reality Productions, 2014. And it is released under a Creative Commons non-attribution share-alike non-commercial license. Contact us at www.19nocturneboulevard.com for other productions from Reality Productions and Julie Hoverson.